لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. In our last 10 night reminders, we began by looking at not following one's whim, tark al-hawa, right, and the importance of that. The second step on the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can define is sincerity of intention. Sincerity of intention. And sincerity of intention arises by making choices for Allah. Right? Making choices for Allah. We do not make whimsical choices or choices based on desire alone. Rather, the believer is one who strives to make choices for the sake of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in Surah Al-Bayyinah, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهِ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ حُنَفَاءَ. They've not been commanded except that they be devoted to Allah, making their life choice. Deen is your life choices, right? Making their religion, or more broadly, making their life choices for the sake of Allah alone. Hunafa, upright. So they've not been commanded except that they be devoted to Allah. It begins, of course, with our ritual acts of devotion, our worship. But then to the extent that you can make all your choices enveloped by this sense of devotion to Allah. So not only in your prayer, but in your work, in your social relations, in your worldly enjoyments, if you can make them out of ibadah to Allah, out of devotion to Allah, right? And sincerely for His sake and with uprightness, hunafa. If you can bring these three things in to your life, then you have fulfilled the framework for living a purposeful life. And this is from Surah Al-Bayyinah, Surah 98, verse 5. Where does this found? In your intention. Right? The second step after leaving whim is make purposeful choices through intention in worship, in work, in all your relationships, in your worldly choices, and in your enjoyment, the things that you enjoy, the pleasures of life. If in these areas you can bring devoted purpose into your life, right? So you do it in a manner that is pleasing to Allah, and you seek the pleasure of Allah in it. In acts of worship, don't make your focus to worship, but rather to seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through your worship. Similarly, in your work, don't just go to work. Go to work, see that your work is an act of devotion, and do it seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your social relationships are not about your husband, they're not about your wife, they're not about your parents, they're not about your children. It's about being devoted to Allah, seeking the pleasure of Allah by dealing with all your social relationships in a manner pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise, your work, you talk about worship, work, social relations, your life choices. Why do you choose to buy something or not buy something? Your pleasures, seek to do it in a manner pleasing to Allah, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala thereby. If you can make that, then as the believer, the Imam of the believers, our beloved Messenger ﷺ said, how strange are the affairs of the believer, for everything is for their good. Right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us this meaning of cultivating sincerity through purposeful choices. Right? So first step was to leave whim. Number two is make purposeful choices. How? Through sincerely seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the choices we make. Barakallahu ta'ala fikum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.